Good morning. This is Jonathan Albin, and this is NycosRPG. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Today we are doing another episode of The World in Around 80 Days. As a game master and world builder, I endeavor to help others create their own fantasy settings, whether it be fantasy or sci-fi or dystopia. The mechanics of world building are fundamentally the same, and so I try to do what I can to help. And today we're going to be talking about a rather essential piece of world building. And we have talked about character creation. We've talked about doing some locational navigation, determining what are your important points in the story. But we haven't really talked about this aspect before, and that is, what is your story? What is it that you are trying to convey? If you have a solid idea of what it is you want to create, then your story will develop over time and your players will experience it as if it were a persona in the group, a character in the group, because the interactions with a story are, as we've already discussed in at least one episode, have the community functions as an individual when it comes to larger scale events. It's an organism, a social organism, and therefore it operates under the same kind of parameters, in that you can generally work with a community for various objectives. So today we're going to be looking at not only what your story is in particular, and certainly I'm open to discussing that with you if you come online and want to have that discussion. But more importantly, I want to know what is a story. And to get an idea of what a story is, we first have to have a pretty good picture of what a story is not. And what I mean by this statement is that, for example, the plot of the adventure or the story is not itself the story. Yes, you have an idea, a pathway that you intend for the adventurers to pursue, but the story is by no means complete with just the plot. It is a mere skeleton of what it would be. The theme is not a story. The theme is the setting, the staging, the vocabulary, the light or darkness of the experience, but that does not make it the story. So the theme isn't the story. Even the cast is not a story, even if the cast is integral in processing the actions in the scene. They are not the story themselves. It's something more than that. So then the question becomes, well, is it the scene? Is it the setting? And neither of those are either the story either, because they depend on what the players do in that framework. So a better way of understanding the story actually comes from our friends in journalism. So a story is going to be a whole group of elements. It's going to be the elements of the story, the appeal, the outcomes from it, and the effects it will have on the overall world that the story occurs in. Well, what do I mean when I speak of elements? Well, we are speaking of... This is where I was referring to the journalists. The journalists of the word will tell you that a story is made up by the 5 W's and the H: who, what, when, where, why, and how. And you'll notice that I only listed 4 of them here. The who, what, where, and when are the elements of the story. You have to have these in place for the story to occur. So the very things we mentioned before, the cast is a piece of, or an element of the story, but they are not the story by themselves. The plot, the elements of the direction of the story is an integral element, but it is not the story by itself. The setting, the scene are elements, but they are not the story itself. And the reason why I don't include the how or the why in the elements here is that those are actually delivered to the scene not by the game master or the storyteller, but by the audience. Now, if you are writing it as a novel, then certainly you have to be able to present that information in story form. So therefore, yes, you would be going ahead and creating both the how and the why. But in the case of an RPG, you simply set the stage, introduce the characters, and then navigate the action, and therefore capture the story in the play itself, as Shakespeare would eventually misquote and say, all the world's a role-play game and we are merely players. I know I just paraphrased that, but the idea is that we have to develop the story as the players in the game. Otherwise, it's not something that we've participated in and we've just viewed it. One of the biggest challenges, for example, to being what's considered a railroad game master, a railroad engineer game master, is that you are usually accused of not letting the players have enough agency to actually engage and create the story. And so by remembering that the elements don't include the parts that the players bring, it will really help you to create the story that you're wanting to get to. And we haven't gotten to what your story is yet, but we're going to be getting there here in a minute. I just wanted to point out that what the elements are is all of it goes back to the just the facts, ma'am. It's just the core information that makes up the event without character agency. The next thing we need to look at is how do we build the appeal of the story. And I'm using the term appeal here to refer to how do we engage the players in the story elements that we've created. Granted, if we build a beautiful scene and we establish intriguing characters, there are some elements of that might themselves fill in these characteristics. But what we're really looking for is what part of that structure will drag the players inexorably into the action. So the mentioning that their nemesis will be at this party or whatever will definitely build some interest in engagement. Perhaps they will have an opportunity to confront them in front of witnesses. There's some bait on the hook. They might have a villain that they've taken several weeks to hunt down, and so therefore they're finally getting their satisfaction. So that's setting that hook, making sure that the players are just faunching at the bit, so to speak, to really engage. Then you give them you pay them enough line, you share enough of the locale's nuances so that the players will start to figure out how to engage. And then finally, this is the confrontation, and let's ready to rock and roll. That's the hook, line, and sinker. You've brought them in, and now they are fully engaged, and they are now in the story, and therefore the appeal of the story is the part that is like the magnet that brings the players into the action. If you create a setting and you put in none of these appealing aspects, if there's no draw to why the players would want to engage, you may find yourself in situations where the players are literally looking at each other trying to decide what they're supposed to do because it didn't appeal to them, and you didn't get enough of the hook set for them to really engage in the story. And I've had dozens of times that I've talked with game masters that's precisely what has happened, is that they are not able to get their players to commit. And so we really had to work on developing their story appeal. And this does go back to the original elements of the story. Why did this scene need to happen? What is making it the feature scene of the afternoon or whatever? And when you consider all the pieces to a story, then it makes it easier for you to build this. Now, naturally, when you're building a story, you as the creator have to be thinking beyond the end of the fight. In other words, you're beyond the end of the conflict. If the scene is going to play out that the players have engaged with their nemesis, what are going to be the outcomes? So there are going to be some things that have to basically occur in every session for the players to feel satisfaction. And the first of those is they need to have some form of skill progression. Now, in Dungeons and Dragons or other classic RPGs, this is done through earned experience points or some kind of bonus structure that provides them that progression. In the realm of NycosRPG, each time you use an action in-game, it is afforded the opportunity to be advanced 1 point per session. So over time, the players will have achieved their successes they're looking for in each and every skill that they wish to pursue. And while that is important, stepping into a scene simply to create skill progression, I mean, you could have them walking through a market and build up some skills, either through communication or through tool use or something. So the concept here of having skill progression as an outcome can only be a part of the story. It can't be the whole cause. So another thing that often happens in a scene is discovery. For example, finding out that the villain does have a reputation in town, does have allies and enemies and such that are part of the equation to consider as well. These are useful pieces of discovery so that the players feel like the scene has merit. But even greater and stronger than that would be the concept of an interaction and or a conflict. Maybe they're meeting the villain face to face for the first time since their last engagement, and so there's going to be a dramatic dialogue between them. This can be as simple as simply having a conversation between the two of them, but it could be dramatic. It could be called up on stage, put in front of an audience, questioned in public. These are all ways that we can ratchet up the interest and the excitement of that scene in our story so that the story's drive is really made apparent. And of course, that will even go further if we go to blows, we go to a physical engagement. Now, whether that be a pursuit scene where one of the actors in the scene decides to run and the rest have to hunt them down or pursue them, that's a simple form of conflict, but perhaps it is actually a martial where they've drawn weapons and they're now facing off in a public place. These are all things that are part of the story and are what are important because we have to have that interaction for the players to feel the excitement and the interest in the story itself. This also can lead to deduction and resolution. There may not be a conflict at all. It might be information that they need to gather, but they have to determine which information is useful, which information is irrelevant, and work through to gather that information, whether it be through a series of skills checks or interplay communication-wise. Maybe it literally is gathering people's statements and discerning what the truth is among the various presenters in the scene. And then finally, of course, there's the other element of an outcome that is absolutely requiring a check mark in the player's mind, and that is the resources and acquisitions. Did we pick up any cool stuff? When we chased the enemy away, did he leave any tidbits or useful items for us to add to our asset list? Are there ramifications of the scene that will provide us with additional assets? These are all forms of outcome that have to be included for a scene to really be the actual story itself. And then finally, there needs to be some effects from the scene. That is to say, it's good to have the action. It's good to have the equipment. It's good to have all of that. But there are effects of the story that are lingering and have to be considered. So, for example, one of them is that the individual scenes that you play out with your participants and your players are your connective tissue. That's what holds the adventure together. If you are running serialized one shots, just simply the passage of time between the scenes can be considered to be a form of connective tissue. If you are not running a series, a campaign structure or style, connective tissue may not be as important because you might be changing out persona week over week. But even within the scene, if you are running multiple scenes in an encounter, or during a particular day you're going to have several encounters, there still needs to be connective tissue between them to make it less of just scene vignettes and more of an actual story on its own. Other effects of a scene or a series of scenes is the satisfaction of interests. If the players came into town to look for a particular villain or to look for evidence of his being in town, if you never pursued any of that or provided any of that to your players, they would be dissatisfied. So it's something else to consider when you're trying to analyze what in your game is causing the conflicts. It may be that you're not satisfying their interests or answering their questions. A great example I can think of is a games group that I was involved with some time back, where the players had as their intention to find the westward exit from a location. The storyteller hadn't intended for there to be a westward exit at all, and instead of simply saying, yeah, you've searched and there are no westward exits, the storyteller instead continued to give them empty hallways, empty doorways, passages that went nowhere, and kept telling the players, you're going the wrong way. But that doesn't satisfy. There's no acceptance of that. If there's a possibility of going west, there must be something that direction. So yes, if I haven't gone through every possible door in the west, and you are the storyteller telling me don't go west anymore, that's just asking for me to try to find more ways to get into the west area. So just realize that your satisfaction of interests can be a no. You can simply say, yes, you have searched all of the possible west exits and there are none. At least you have satisfied their curiosity and their desire to have checked out all options. If you tell them they have acceptably checked all of the exits, they're going to feel the satisfaction even if it was not fruitful. Players also, especially in the case of adventure campaign-based play, the players want to feel a sense of accomplishment, and this applies in a vignette, a tiny scene, or a full-on feature combat. The idea that we have achieved something is important to the mindset of the participants, and so realize that maybe that literally was, we're going to the library and we're going to look up stuff in the library and do some research die rolls, blah, blah, blah. It might be the most boring thing ever, but if the players are intent on doing it, then providing them a sense of accomplishment that when they have achieved whatever those goals were. You definitely want to include that, because that is what the story is made of, is the players checking off what we did. We did this and we did that, and we searched the library and we found information about that certain villain, etc., etc. Now, we talked about it in an earlier portion when we talked about the actual effects. My brain just left my ears. The outcomes of the scene. But one of the effects also has to be progression and advancement. if the players are not moving forward on their own courses, at the very least, they're going to feel stagnant. They're going to feel like there's no point. And if you've got a vibrant progression mechanism like NycosRPG, the players will take the driver's seat and you won't have to worry about it any longer, because they're going to certainly make sure that they press for advancement in every opportunity inside the game, and therefore make it easier on you to simply approve the dice rolls in the places where it makes sense. And their advancement along the courses of the story are really a matter of you providing them with the check marks, benchmarks, as they pass by them. Beyond that, though, one of the things that I have found really useful, and it doesn't have to happen very often, but providing the players the opportunity to celebrate their victories is absolutely critical. The idea is that they have to not only strive and work and develop the story as they're going, but they need to feel like people. If we have hunted down the Wicked Witch and we have put the Wicked Witch out of our misery, then Ding Dong the Witch is dead is a song of jubilation, and we are happy to have accomplished. So allow them to celebrate. Allow for there to be a time of release and rewinding so that the players can feel the ebb and flow of the excitement level of the adventure. If you do not have the climaxes and the anticlimaxes, the crescendos and the flat spaces, your adventure's texture will feel off. In other words, if every single scene is a combat scene, and you do that week over week over week, the players will develop a sense of disproportionate nature in that and will feel dissatisfied. They will no longer be, even if they win every conflict, they will feel as if they are missing out on opportunities they should have been able to sink their teeth into. The next question really about your story is it serial? How are you setting it up? Is it set up as serial, so one encounter, one session? Are you setting it up so that they're chapterized, so there's a period of time that passes between the end of one and the beginning of the other? In other words, are the scenes contiguous and ongoing, or are they staccato, separated by time and perhaps even location? And then finally, maybe all that you're doing with your breaks is creating a save screen opportunity. You literally want the players to move from one set of actions to the next set of actions. Doing so while offering opportunities to celebrate, even if they're minuscule, will provide for your story a structure. There's absolutely nothing wrong with any of the styles of storytelling you would want to tell, whether it be the one-shot, one story, an encounter methodology, or a series of 3 or 4 events that link together, or a full-on year-over-year campaign. Any and all of those are adequate and acceptable for storytelling, but you really have to get an idea of what you want those story elements to bring together. What is it that we are doing with these scenes? Because if a player feels that the scene is not fulfilling, then they will be less inclined to build on that scene in the next episode. Now, I rattled this off pretty quickly. I'm getting pretty good at getting it down to a little bit less than half an hour, so I'm going to keep you from getting to the commercials. I suppose that's a good thing. But I did want to mention that this is... Oh, here's my page. Oh, dear. I've got it on the other piece of software. That's good. Yep. Yep, we're doing all kinds of changes, showing you all the different things that we can do. Alrighty, so let's get back here. The reality is that your story is yours. And so my question to you is, what is your story? What are you trying to develop? Is it a continuous ongoing tale of adventure with there being some linking element, in which case we would call it perhaps a travelogue or a travelogue's probably the easiest, but you can serialize based on what the characters are trying to accomplish, and therefore you're going snippets and bits as they pursue their private and independent objectives, linking them all together as you go. Or are you looking for the growth and advancement of the personas over time, showing their change from the innocent youth to the war-weathered veteran? Whatever the story is you want to tell, these elements, the appeal, the outcomes and effects that we've talked about, will make your stories really strong as your central anchor. Now, in terms of the number of days it would take for you to create one, you certainly could use the CIS from NycosRPG, the Community Identity Sheet, to build out a locale. You certainly could use the persona sheets to create your non-enjoined persons, whether they be your villains or your townsfolk. But really, the element of story that you as a game master have to develop is really your own process. And every game master is different. And we will go over the evolution of game masters in the next episode or two, because I want to demonstrate that your processes will change over time, and that the way in which you play and the way in which your players interact will change as well. Before I leave, though, I do want to mention that this is NycosRPG, and we are broadcasting both here and in recordings on YouTube. And we are trying to build our YouTube subscriber list. Right now we are sitting in the upper end of the 80s, and I'm trying to get to 100. If you can do so, simply jump onto NycosRPG on YouTube and like and subscribe to the channel. If you really like the material and want more information, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/Nycos. If you're interested in purchasing NycosRPG, the game mechanic is available at NycosRPG. There's already a free-to-play, fast play version at NycosRPG.com. So definitely check that out, download it, and give me some feedback on what you think of it. And we are working on developing towards a Kickstarter sometime near the end of this year, and we look forward to your input in any fashion that you wish. Definitely reach out to us through our comments section on NycosRPG, and also at YouTube. On YouTube, and also you can send me a direct message through NycosRPG.com. I'm Jonathan Albin. This has been NycosRPGs around the world. The world in around 80 days, and we will talk to you again soon.